The following program is brought to you by Rogers Anyplace TV. Enjoy exclusive content for free. Visit RogersAnyplaceTV.com.
Welcome everyone, candidates, panelists, and viewers. My name is Hannah DeYoung. I'm the treasurer of the Gander and Area Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the Chamber, I welcome you to the 2019 Federal Political Forum. It is a huge pleasure for us to partner again with Rogers TV in hosting this forum. Huge welcome to the candidates, Alex Brockie from the Conservative Party, Noel Joe from the NDP, Scott Sims, the incumbent from the Liberal Party, Byron White from the Green Party. I take this opportunity to wish each of you the best tonight and throughout the campaign. It is now my pleasure to introduce our three panelists. So we have Martin Jones of the CBC Newfoundland Morning Show, Randy Connors from Stingray Radio Station, Brian Mosher, a retired teacher from the Gander Collegiate. Sitting next to me is our timekeeper, Sheldon Hancock, who is the second vice chair of the chamber. Sheldon has been assigned the difficult task of keeping us all on time. The role of the timekeeper is to keep the candidates on track. As you will notice, there is a box in front of Sheldon with 3 lights on it. Green will indicate the start of the candidate's response, white will indicate time to wrap up, and red will indicate time's up, at which point the candidate will stop speaking. I ask that each of the candidates pay close attention to the lights and abide by the rules. We're going to start with the candidates' opening remarks, then go to 8 questions from our panel. We will have a 4-minute break. Then we'll return with 6 questions from the audience. Then we'll have 4 remaining questions from the panel, and then we will have closing remarks. The rules for the forum are pretty simple. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for opening remarks. There will be a total of 12 questions from the panelists, 3 questions per candidate. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to questions directed at them. The remaining candidates will have 1 minute for their reaction. Questions from the floor will be on a draw basis, so members of the audience wishing to pose questions to the candidates are asked to put your name in the containers at the entrance of the theater. Once the name is drawn, the individual is asked to proceed to the microphone as quickly as possible. To maximize the number of audience questions, please keep them brief and under a minute. Candidates will have 1 minute to respond to the question, with each of the other candidates having 30 seconds for reaction. And then we will have closing remarks, and once again, 2 minutes for each candidate. So thank you so much for your attention. We wish you a very interesting and hopefully informative evening. So we are going to start with the candidates' opening remarks. The candidates' seating arrangements were determined alphabetically, and we will start with Alex Brockie of the Conservative Party of Canada.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hannah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Here at the Arts and Cultural Center and on TV, and of course worldwide there on the internet. Distinguished panelists. So my name is Alex Brockie, and as far as an introduction, I'll just give you a brief introduction on how I got here. And so for the last 12 years, I've been a part owner of a small restaurant here in Gander, Bistro on Row. I was a cook and part owner. And before that, I had a small B&B in Gambo that I owned back in 2003, that I opened up in 2003. Originally from Montreal, I lived in Toronto, and been here in Newfoundland, Labrador for 16 years. So Newfoundland and Labrador is home for me. And the big question that I've been getting over the last few months as I've been knocking on doors has been, well, what's your connection with politics? And my connection with politics is that I've been president of the District Association for the Conservative Party of Canada here in central Newfoundland. And so I wanted to, I made an effort to seek the nomination, and I was successful. My goal, if elected, is to bring back that feeling that Newfoundlanders and Labradorians had a few years ago, that when we were a half province. And in a nutshell, that's what I'd like to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rachi. I will now call upon Noel Joe of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us here today. Thanks to Rogers and also the fellow candidates. I want to start by saying it's been incredibly few weeks, few months, I should say, knocking on doors, attending events, visiting communities around the riding. I'm ready to and excited to serve the people of Coast of Bays-Central-Notre Dame, and the people are ready for a change. This is an important election. I think people are worried about the cost of living, affordable housing, medication, cell phone bills. Important issues like climate change and major issues lacking the attention with the current government. Support for our older adults with services such as pharmacare and dental care are being ignored. The challenge of reconciliation is an area where neither the Conservatives nor the Liberals have done enough. Young people continue to struggle to pay for their educations and their first homes. Kids continue to grow up in unsafe, overcrowded homes and schools on reserves, and there are still water ball advisories on reserves in Canada. All of this deserves government's attention now. New Democrats are in it for you, and we are on the side of the working Canadians, both young and old, not working for the big corporations. We know that Canadians want a more affordable life. We know that Canadians want and deserve services like universal pharmacare, and we deserve services like the dental care and the action on big issues such as reconciliation and climate change. That's why New Democrats are going to bring in a national pharmacare and dental care program that works. We are going to ensure we stop profiting of our vulnerable populations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. We're now going to go to Scott Sims, the incumbent from the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Hannah. So, Scott Sims, what have you done in 4 years? You're probably asking. Over $190 million in this riding in the past 4 years since the last election. Now, that's not an exercise of me patting myself on the back, because most politicians do that. They pretend like it's their money, when in actual fact it's your money. And that's what brings me here today, is to say that I hope this forum tonight is about inspiration. I want to thank the Chamber for putting this off, as always. I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank Rogers especially for broadcasting this to all. Inspiration. Each and every project that I've worked on in this riding has always been inspired by you. I'll give an example. Sewage treatment here in Gander. I got a letter from a young lady, very young lady, who said to me, "Mr. Sims, it stinks in town. We need a poo tank." So you know what she meant by poo tank. So nevertheless, I worked hard with the town. The town had a lot of patience, and I thank you so much, Town of Gander. I want to thank Dr. Haggie for doing this, but we were able to come through with a project that was necessary. Let's go to my hometown, Bishops Falls. Talk about tourism. Finally, Bishops Falls is saying we're going to live on a river, and we're going to introduce this river to the whole world. It is going to be a tourism gem. We worked with I was inspired by the town council to move on this. We now have work around the trestle, around the park, and a beautiful observation deck on the east end of Bishop Falls. Here's another example of inspiration. Honey. Some of the best honey you'll ever eat in this country is up on Tuck's Be Better Farm. Trevor and Kim. They produce some of the best honey you'll ever see, and they inspired us to invest in them. That's what local representation is about, to be inspired by what you want to do, and we make sure that it happens. Luckily, I'm with a government who also believes the same thing, that we can go forward, and that's what we hope to do. That's my commitment. So in this debate, I humbly ask you, in the world of 24-hour news channels, Canadian or American, especially American, there's a lot of hate, there's a lot of labeling, and a lot of angry people out there. But I'm asking you in this forum, and I'm sure you'll get it here tonight, because I think I'm up here with 3 other people who are very good at what they do.
Thank you, Mr.
That you'll be
Sims.
inspired by this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're going to go to Byron White from the Green Party.
Hi, I'm Byron White of the Green Party. I'm from Comfort Cove, Newstead, here in rural Newfoundland, and proud of it. I look around the stage, I look at Noel there, Noel Joel, just a young man with the bloom of youth still upon his cheek. And you're probably looking at me and saying, I've got the scars from my hockey games, I've got the scars from a life that's progressed a little while, and what's he doing? What's he running for? Well, I'll tell you what I'm running for. I'm running because I believe that we are in a situation in this world right now where we have to make choices. We have to make choices. I'm running for my children, my grandchildren, and for future generations. We have to get this climate thing under control. We have to get off of our addiction to fossil fuels. And we have to get carbon down to the level, or reduce our carbon, so that we can live sustainably. By 2000 and in another 10 years, 2030, we have to be back to the 2005 levels for carbon emissions. And by 2050, we have to meet the targets where we're basically carbon neutral. We can do that. The good news is we can do that, but we can't do it if we're going to be looking in the rear view mirror and not looking forward into the green economy. I'll say more on that later. Another reason that I'm running, and with all deference to Scott, who I have great no animosity for whatsoever, but during the last election, Prime Minister Trudeau said, the ferry coming in from Nova Scotia, the Tories had raised the rates to a degree where right now they're above the pall. Prime Minister Trudeau said that these rates should be lowered. He agreed on that. We turned around and elected 7 Liberal MPs, which is good. I was a president of a Liberal association in central Newfoundland in Lewisport at one point. And, but where is the representation?
Thank you. At this time, we'll proceed with questions from the panel. Each of the panelists will ask consecutive questions to the candidates, starting with Mr. Brockie, followed by Mr. Joe, Mr. Sims, and Mr. White. Each candidate will be asked 2 questions with 2 minutes to respond, while each of the other candidates will have 1 minute for reaction.
Mr. Brockie, Gander is well known as an aerospace center of excellence. With the aerospace sector not only in Gander and the province, but worldwide, this sector is growing in the demand for trained individuals and new innovative aerospace technology. How would you and your party work with the province and local public and private entities to grow the aerospace industry?
Thank you, Randy, for the question. Now, as far as how would myself and the party work with the municipal authorities in trying to promote that industry, I usually take, when it comes to a business, I would take a bottoms up approach to addressing that particular issue. So number one, I would have to look at the proposal or a business plan or some sort of idea that is well thought out and that is viable, and then from there I would take it to the next levels. And when it comes to trying to generate higher paying jobs, that's what my whole campaign is about. I've been talking to people that, if elected, I'd like to encourage entities to hire more people that would result in higher paying jobs that this district desperately needs. Currently we have an unemployment rate of something like 20%, so which is unacceptable. But Randy, to answer your question, I would look at the proposal first and then take it to the right departments in Ottawa and shake any trees to get some fruit. You know what I'm saying? So that would be how I would solve that problem. Yeah.
Thank you. Now we'll have reactions from the others.
Thank you. This is a good question because, I attended, back in 2015, I attended Gander flight training to do flight training. To invest, the NDP is looking at investing into aerospace technologies and doing the things. We are committed to the aerospace technology industry and everything like that, and I would look at certainly the jobs and that it would create, and reviewing that as well in Ottawa.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Sims?
Thank you. Skills. Skills training is one of the greatest exports that we have in central Newfoundland. We can talk about mining, we talk about fisheries. Yes, they are very important, but our skilled labor is some of the best in the world, and they're traveling all over the world. But a lot of that starts right here. CNA does an excellent job on training aircraft mechanics. We also have Gander flight training, as Noel pointed out. They also training some of the best pilots we know, and there is a huge shortage of pilots to the point where it's going to be devastating to the entire industry. And right now, Gander flight training is punching way above its weight. They're also attracting pilots from around the world, and they get their start right here. That's a big cluster of it. Now we just have to look at things like, for instance, on the East Coast, we have an ocean cluster. And we should also look at buying into the aerospace cluster as well, which we can do around here with all these companies that are involved. The thing is, the capital has to be available, but the skills and the training required for our individuals to stay here and work is very important. That's why in our plan, we're talking about Red Seal improvements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White?
Yes. Well, I don't presume to have all the answers. I would go to the industry first and see what their position is and get more details on that. But I do know that in Newfoundland, there's thousands of jobs opening up in this kind of sector and in the tech sector. Right now, there's over $1.5 billion annually coming into this province and being utilized in this province for high-tech jobs. There are 35 local companies, and these could all tie in with what's going on here. And one of these local companies, I'm proud to say, is headed up by Rodney Hale, who harkens from Comfort Cove Newstead, and he has a tech job in St. John's that he's putting forward, and he's the guy that's, if you go through security now, it's his agency that does all the screening technology, and that's being utilized by the various companies. So that kind of technology, talking to the industry, seeing what's needed, that's what I would do.
Thank you, Mr. White.
My question is for Mr. Joe. The province's seniors advocate recently released a report that considered some major issues being faced by seniors in this province. Delayed retirements, lack of coverage for medical devices, and an inability to afford medications. What will your party do to change some of these issues faced by our seniors in Newfoundland and Labrador?
Thank you, Mark. Seniors, we need to take care of our seniors. We look at investing in pharmacare, dental care for our seniors. If our seniors don't have good dental care, how can they have good food, eat good food with their, not being able to purchase the dentures? They have to make sure they're either on, looking at paying for rent or dental care. So we're looking at that as well. Another thing is the pension plan. We're looking at expanding on that and making that more accessible for them as well. So we're also looking at affordable housing for seniors, and then that is the bottom line for our seniors. We need to take care and do more for our seniors. So.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Sims.
Thank you. First things first, we decided to move the age of retirement for the eligibility for benefits from 67 to 65. That's first. Second thing we did, we put more money into old age security because the number one issue in both my offices in Gander and Grand Falls, Windsor, the biggest issue is seniors' poverty. And that runs the gamut of many things, including that. Old age security right now is going to be increased under a plan for those turning 75, 10%. But the one issue in our plan, which I'm very proud to say we've been asking for years, is an increase to survivor benefits, because so many seniors in this area especially need more in survivors benefits. A 60% redemption is just not enough. It's not cutting it. We need that and a national dementia strategy as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White.
Difficult question, but I know a lot of seniors are at or below the poverty line. That's where they are. So I agree with Scott. We need to do those things as far as raising the benefits that these people have. But quite beyond that, too, we need a national pharmacare strategy, and the Green Party has been pushing that since 2012. If you listen to CBC and the other stations, it's only the NDP or the Liberals that have been doing that. Well, thanks to a couple of Green Party members, now they're getting the voice heard, and they're pushing those parties to incorporate pharmacare so that the drugs that the seniors are on can be covered. All these additional expenses for seniors need to be looked at, and we have to find a way to address these issues, because you need more medicine and more medical care as you get older.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Brockie.
Thank you, Hannah. I think we should start off by saying that Justin Trudeau and the Liberals have created a cost of living crisis for seniors and for all Canadians in the country. So they've hiked taxes, and they've made everything, everyday essentials like gas and groceries and home heating more expensive. So our seniors have helped us build this country, and we have to look after them. So the Conservative Party of Canada will put policies forward that'll make everyday life more affordable for seniors and for Canadians in general. So that includes things like getting rid of the carbon tax, for one, and then number two, abolishing the GST on home heating fuels, and then also reducing or implementing a universal tax credit.
Thank you, Mr. Brockie.
Sure.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Sims of the Liberal Party. Mr. Sims, with no formal agreement about the amount Ottawa is willing to contribute to rate mitigation for Muskrat Falls, what's your party's plan for paying for this project?
Yeah, good question. When Muskrat Falls first came out many years ago, the thing that occurred to me the most was about the rising rates and the fact that a lot of our seniors, especially, still live in their households on top of drug costs and everything else. Right now, we're negotiating with the province to find a way to do this that is responsible, and one that is going to be one that could work on a national basis as well. So what I'm pushing for personally is rate mitigation that sees that seniors, vulnerable seniors mostly, will not have to pay the rates that may go up. But in general, we also have to invest so that rate mitigation does not become one of the largest costs for any individual, any household, because that is likely to happen. We know what Muskrat Falls is now. It is ballooned in price, and someone's got to pay for this. We have to make sure that is not done on the backs of seniors. It is a commitment I made way back when. It's a commitment that I make now, and we've said to the Prime Minister, and we're hoping that whichever party wins this election, will continue to work with the province on rate mitigation, as it is essential.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White.
Yes, it's Muskrat Falls, as they say, is what it is. We have to deal with it now. We have to find a way to mitigate the cost. I think Canada, the rest of Canada, owes us, not owes us. They should, out of fairness, step up to the plate for us. Right now, the federal transfer payments as a percentage of our budget, local budget, is 17.2%. Compare this with the rest of Atlantic Canada. New Brunswick, 36.7% in transfer payments. Nova Scotia, 30.5% in transfer payments. PEI, 39% of their budget is transfer payments coming in. Ottawa can do a lot more for us on that. Back when the Churchill Falls Agreement, was signed, Newfoundland kept quiet then because separation was a big issue in Quebec. We contributed to keeping Canada together. Canada now needs to contribute to us by putting some money back in when we need it to keep our part in Canada.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Brockie.
Well, I think the province has come out and said that, the province, in order to pay for Muskrat Falls, I guess, on the short term, they would have to come up with over $700 million, something like closer to $729 million, and the Trudeau government has stepped in and started negotiations. The provincial government is looking for $200 million to offset some of the electricity rate increases that are projected. So what can I say? I'm just a candidate here, and what I can say is that the Conservative Party of Canada will continue those negotiations, and I can't make any promises.
Thank you, Mr. Brockie. Mr. Joe.
Muskrat Falls, yes, it is now, what it is. We need, I agree with, I guess, Mr. Sims on this one. Whoever is in, the Prime Minister and that after this election, we need to look at the federal government needs to find a way around, to work with the province on rate mitigation, and make sure that we're not, paying for that cost. Making sure our seniors and our the people is not getting the bigger end of it, right? So.
Thank you, Mr. Joe.
Yeah.
My question is Mr. White. Mr. White, Gander is a leader in environmental stewardship. Recently, we've seen more federal money become available to help us go from good to great in this area. What will you do to continue greenhouse gas reducing funding for this area?
Okay, I should say that's right up my alley, but it's a very broad question. The Green Party are all in reducing our carbon emissions and the greenhouse gases. That's why I'm with the Green Party as opposed to some of the other parties. One of the main reasons I'm here. There's lots of things we can do. Here in Gander, in central Newfoundland, but also throughout the province here, we have Muskrat Falls, a boondoggle maybe, you can call it what it wants, but all this electricity is coming in. Here we are ideally situated to convert things to all of our buildings, a lot of our automobiles and cars, to electricity, to electric transportation. Gander could be a hub for that. Also, fuel cells. Parts of Europe, specifically France, Germany, but even out into other countries in Asia and Japan, places like that, they're investing in fuel cells that are hydrogen-based. It needs a lot of energy. Where else but here in Newfoundland? We're going to use this Muskrat Falls. We have it. Let's use it to our advantage. Let's get technology in here. Let's get it here in Gander, where we can invest in this kind of technology, in green technology, and let's make this a hub for developing green technology, reducing our carbon emissions, because we have to do it, and we know how to do it. It's just that we're looking in the rear view mirror at the old economy. The new economy is right there in front of us. We need to catch up with Europe and the rest of the world, and we can do this. Gander is ideally situated for it, and so I think that with the proper leadership, this can be done.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Brockie.
Yes, thanks, Randy. As far as the environment, the Conservative Party of Canada is focused on technology, and so the advances that the town of Gander have made is something that the party supports and will continue to support because in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it won't be a tax that's going to reduce it. It's going to be ingenuity. Just like many people in this province had many challenges in their past, and they succeeded by working hard and by coming up with solutions, and not by taxing themselves to a better future.
Thank you, Mr. Brockie. Mr. Joe.
The environment is very important. We need to fight the climate crisis like we want to win. And I think if we look at our New Deal for climate action, by creating 300,000 jobs under that plan, and reduce emissions twice as fast than the Liberals, and we need to. I think by fighting climate change, I think we can, by working with that and working with the town of Gander and working with the area, I think we can create new ways in fighting and protecting our environments.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Sims.
Home retrofits, building efficiencies have been a major part of what we're going to do. As a matter of fact, we started it right here in Gander. Gander Airport was the first carbon neutral airport to brag about across the country. So there's the leadership right there. There's the spark. We're looking at phasing out coal, of course, and this is where Muskrat Falls might redeem itself in a little bit. But zero plastic waste is also what we want to do. And finally, after years of asking, we have a national silviculture tree planting program. It may sound to some people a bit kitschy, but actually 2 billion trees will do a lot. 30 metric tons by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims.
My question is for Mr. Brockie. Mr. Brockie, 1 in 2 women over the age of 15 in this province will experience sexual or physical violence in their lifetime. So my question is, what strategies and policies will you put in place to address violence against all women in this province?
Well, Martin, that's a good question. I mean, it's unfortunate that women and young ladies are face those kinds of conditions. But we have to address them through education, and as far as tightening up the criminal code, then those are other avenues that we could use. But to me, it would be a multi-pronged approach. And through consultations of various groups, which I'm assuming are already in place, then we can keep that dialogue with the federal government and local authorities to reduce the occurrence of those activities.
Thank you, Mr. Brockie. Mr. Joe.
Thank you. We look at women's rights and that, and I think we need, it's hard to find a strong example of where Mr. Trudeau's words doesn't match his actions when we look at what he's, by firing Jody Wilson-Raybould as the Attorney General and kicked him out of caucus and how can we support, we need to support our women. We need to stand up for our women. It's not enough to say that we believe in a woman's rights to choose, and we need to make abortion and reproductive health care services accessible and safe for all women. And no women should be the victim of violence and should be turned away from any shelters and that. And we need to create more spaces for women to get involved in politics and start there. And I think that I would definitely support that.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Sims.
Violence against women and young girls is a scourge on this earth that needs to be absolutely eliminated immediately. And the only way we can do that is for education levels to rise. I want to compliment the provincial government for the work that they've done, not just the current Liberal government, but the former PC government, who did a lot when it comes to combating violence against women. There's a beautiful facility here in Gander near the airport. We all know what we're talking about, and for women in transition that does wonderful work. But all this happens because women here and men are putting the issue at the forefront to identify what violence is and how it has to be stopped. So thank you to all of them who've done that, especially here in this town and throughout central Newfoundland.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White.
Well, for once, I wholeheartedly agree with Scott there on this. I think that first thing I would do would be to talk to the various women's groups, get their input. And I agree that education has got to be the way to change the views in society. As a man myself, I have two sisters that are very, very vocal, and they put me in my place once in a while. I don't even realize half the time my own prejudices and the way I convey myself. And I think a lot of men are like that. So when I say education, I don't just mean education from the young boys going up through. I mean education for the older people too, so we can be better role models. We need that put in place so that women do not have to suffer the scourge of being abused. We're still, in lots of ways, a male-dominated society, whether we believe it or not, or whether we acknowledge it or not. And so we need, as someone else said, maybe Noel, we need more women in politics, we need more education of the young people in the school system, and we need more education for the adults.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Joe of the New Democratic Party. Mr. Joe, per capita, Gander has the largest community of immigrants, foreign workers, and students from many nationalities and professions. To ensure our population does not decline in the coming years, what would you do to retain these people and make them citizens of our province?
Thanks for the question. We need to support immigration and we need to stand together with, and we need to make those laws more better to protect them, and that, creating good jobs and supporting them while they're here, I think is key. And I would work hard to make sure that that stays.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Sims.
One of the biggest problems the biggest problem we have here is that, of course, when immigrants and/or refugees come into this country, a lot of them come into this area. We just recently had some Syrian refugees here. One of the biggest issues, of course, is second language training in either English or French. Here it would be English, of course. We have to put more resources, and I thank the Association of New Canadians who does this work diligently, both in Central and Eastern. Because they have difficulty in adapting to area because of the language, first and foremost, a lot of them end up becoming urbanized. They move to cities where other family members or other people from their own nation are from. And it seems like they don't get a chance to grow and have roots here, and that's what we have to work on. We're wonderful people. They're come from away, and we say thank you and welcome. But we have to work harder into getting them into society here. Second language training is big. Job skill training is also large. That has to be done as well in order for them to not only stay, but raise families and get decent jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White.
Yes, the issue of immigration is one that we're all grappling with, and each government grapples with that. We are an aging society here in Newfoundland and here in Canada. We need, for very selfish reasons, we need immigrants to a certain number to come in and do the work that's needed to keep our economies growing. So for those very selfish reasons alone, we need certain numbers of immigrants to come in. But we're doing no favor to anyone if we bring in immigrants at the rate where we can't integrate them. We just put them in hotels, where they're stagnated. We need to bring them in at a rate that we can integrate them into Canadian society. It's best for us, it's best for the immigrants, and it will be really cost efficient. Would really like, on the other end of it too, there are situations in war-torn countries or in areas where there is a famine, where we have perhaps sometimes to take more than we can integrate immediately. But as a general rule, I think we should welcome immigrants, integrate them into society, then welcome more immigrants and continue on that way.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Brockie.
Thank you, Hannah. As someone from, as a son of immigrants, this question, relates to me. So, my grandfather came to Canada. He, landed in Halifax and took a train to Montreal, and he He was there, he went there because, he knew somebody. So people, it's important that we have a connection, that people set roots here, and I think the number one, or the best reason to do that is to have opportunities, So, and obviously opportunities, they come with employment, so, so that's how it works, If some come, they have jobs, they set roots. Yeah, they don't like the weather, things are a little different here, but that's okay. They get used to it.
Thank you, Mr. Brockie.
Mr. Sims, the cost for municipalities to comply with the federal wastewater regulation is approximately $600 million. And right now in this region, there are many communities that just don't have reliable drinking water. What will your party do to help communities in the province and in our region upgrade infrastructure to alleviate this situation?
Yeah, we've spent over $50 million the past 4 years, and we're still in the game of catch-up in many instances, whether it be drinking water or wastewater treatment. The situation we have with the municipalities right now, they're under the grip of regulation. And regulation from 2012 basically states that you can't, as Andrew Scheer came here and told us all, we can't put waste into the water, to which we replied, no kidding. The problem with that is with the regulations now, they're being forced upon a whole chain of communities that are not prepared in light of those regulations. What we have to do is this. We have to stop the penalty phase of doing this. Only 3 communities applied for a temporary waiver, or an authorization it's called. That was St. John's, Gander, and Springdale. Everybody else is not complying with the law. So instead of putting ourselves in a situation where we have officers coming into these small towns, they're scared, they think they're going to jail, which they're not, but they could be fined heavily, we have to put ourselves in a position, and this is what I commit myself to doing as a member, if I'm reelected, that I will go and I will say to these communities, we have to learn how to comply with these regulations, not punish them. Our smallest communities have like a part-time clerk that's working there. They're afraid because these people are coming in and bringing these laws down. So now what we have to do is we have to enlighten. We have to say to them, look, you can comply. It's not that difficult in some cases, but it's on us, as well as the province and municipalities, Newfoundland and Labrador, to get answers for them so that they are in compliance. So information is the key for them right away. Then we back that up with the investment that they need to allow their communities to grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White.
Excuse me. Nowadays, and it's been a problem for quite some number of years, I was on the local council in Comfort Cove Newstead for over 20 years. More and more services are being downloaded on municipalities without the taxation base to pay for it. The federal government needs to come up with a program where more money gets to municipalities. They're on the firing line for offering those services, for paying for those services, for getting the money raised, and it's the local councillors, it's the local mayors that are taking all, if you excuse the word, the crap for it. We need to have more money coming to municipalities. That's the answer to it. When Elizabeth May, by the way, the only leader that I know that visited this district lately, she was in central Newfoundland. We were out to Appleton, we were out to Glenwood. We looked at the state-of-the-art sewer treatment out there, where the water is processed, the sewer is processed through, and it's potable when you go into the Gander River. I don't know if I'd want to drink it, but she made a commitment out there that we need to do just that. More and more money put into municipalities so the towns of Glenwood and Appleton don't have to pay the $50,000 a year that they do now just to cover that off.
Thank you. Mr. Brockie.
Okay, well, as far as, now Randy, the question was rural development, I guess, right? Federal funding. Okay, so we need to ensure that all regions, not just urban regions, it seems that the current government tends to, send money or infrastructure money more to large urban centers, but it's important that all regions receive their fair share of infrastructure funding with a budget. So, as far as the Conservative Party of Canada is concerned, we're going to appoint a Minister of Rural Affairs and appoint a minister specifically for Atlantic Canada well, ACOA is obviously for Atlantic Canada, but an actual minister that comes from Atlantic Canada to identify problems and come up with some solutions for all the rural communities in Atlantic Canada, including Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thank you, Mr. Ratchie. Mr. Joe.
Thank you. We need to invest in rural communities and putting funds back in there. I think it's very important that we as the new Democratic Party will invest in rural communities. We need better infrastructure, putting better infrastructure plans and better infrastructure funding in place. And we need to invest in the infrastructure, and that is what the NDP is committed to doing as well. And I think that we need to support people in the rural communities, and we need to support our wastewater management facilities there in the rural communities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joe.
My question is for Mr. White. Mr. White, the provincial economy right now continues to revolve around oil and gas. So how can Ottawa and the province work together to expand other industries like renewable energy, agriculture, and microbusiness?
Well, that's a very good question, and it should tie into what I'm fighting for. We're fighting for moving on to the green economy, to the new economy. And I alluded to part of this answer earlier on. Part of the answer ties in with Muskrat Falls. As I said, it is what it is. We have it. Let's use it to our advantage. The tech industry in Newfoundland, as I said earlier, $1.5 billion is going into the Newfoundland economy through the tech industry. That's more than is coming from putting back in there from things like the fishery and other components that are that's in our economy. So we can use Muskrat Falls. We can develop, as I said earlier, one of my big fights is we have to go carbon neutral by 2050. That's what the Green Party stands for, and that's what I firmly believe that we have to stand for. We have this electricity. We can turn this province into a hub for tech development, for fuel cell development, for hydrogen. We're in a place surrounded by water. We can get hydrogen from that, but it's energy intensive to develop fuel cells, hydrogen fuel cells. We're here in Gander. If we're going to switch the planes over to low emission or no emission carbon, it's not going to be by electric batteries, I tell you that. It's going to have to be by hydrogen cells. They're energy intensive to produce. We have the energy. Let's develop it. Stop looking in the rear view mirror all the time. We need to do that. Stop looking in the rear view mirror at the fossil fuel industry. It has its place, and maybe it's had its place, but there will always be a need for some fossil fuels, but not in the carbon producing area of it. So we can use what we have to make this area boom in the green technology by using the resources we have, if we have the foresight to look ahead and do it.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Ratchie.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Martin. I kind of disagree with that statement that oil and gas is the only, or the economy in the province here revolves around oil and gas. It is a large component, but there are other fairly large contributors to the provincial economy, such as the mining industry, and of course the fishery, which is a staple here in the province and has a tremendous opportunity. Now, as far as how to promote smaller businesses and to diversify the economy, well, then one way you got to do that is by reversing some of the tax increases on small businesses that the Trudeau government has implemented, and also, setting the right tone for entrepreneurs to prosper, and also by not calling them tax cheats.
Thank you, Mr. Ratchie. Mr. Joe.
Thank you. People are working harder and harder to get by from paycheck to paycheck. Imagine an economy that works for us all. Let's build an economy where you don't have to take a massive debt to get an education or a place to live let's invest in our economies. Let's invest in the aquaculture. Let's invest in our resources that we have here, other than oil and gas as well. We have a lot of resources here that we can invest in, and let's do that, and let's work to create a better economy for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Sims.
We have one of the best skilled people in the world right here in central Newfoundland. They fly back and forth, they work here. Yes, many of them in the oil and gas sector, but let's be honest, when it comes to oil and gas or mining, which is really about to take off in areas of central Newfoundland, like Marathon Gold, but we also have 2 mines in active duty up in Bay Verte. But these industries also have a great deal of ingenuity involved, where they can actually cut emissions and actually make the industry more efficient by doing what they do, whether that be Marathon Gold or whether that be Rambler Mines. But the ingenuity we're talking about, let's take Gander, for example. This aerospace, let's go back to your first question, aerospace. Aerospace ingenuity exists here. We have the skills, we have the people, we have the local governance that truly believes in what they're doing and what our people are doing. We just need some of that capital infusion for it to happen so that we can foster the ingenuity. Education through CNA and other establishments would help us also. And big time, we need some of that capital infusion in order for that to happen, so we can lead by example.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. And thank you, candidates and panelists. That concludes the first section of our forum. We are going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to come back to audience questions. So thank you so much. We'll be back soon. Welcome back. We are now going to go to audience questions. So the audience member will have 1 minute to ask their question. The candidate it's directed at will have 1 minute to respond, and then the other candidates will have 30 seconds for their reaction. So we're first going to go to Mary Feltham.
Hi, so my name is Mary Feltham, and I am a recent graduate, and like many youth, I'm concerned about Canada's future. Students have been flooding the streets in protest of climate change. The Canadian Federation of Students have launched a campaign to be bold at the polls, which is aimed to educate young voters, and we are ready to have our voices heard on October 21st. I had a generic for everyone, but I guess I'll put it to NDP candidate. What will you and your party do to ensure that there is a feasible future in Canada for not just students, but for all minorities? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. For me, education is a big thing. I always said the best hope of a nation lies in the proper education of its young people, and we need to invest in our young people. We need to, invest in the education and to help and put the resources there that you need to get a better education, to make a life more affordable for yourself, and do a good job, and that we support the education, and something I'll fight for if I get in. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Sims.
Just quickly on the students issue, yes, some of the things you're going to do are crucial for those who want to finance in the very beginning of getting on with life, affordability of homes, cars, so on and so forth. Below $35,000 in salary, you won't be required to pay back at that point, only when you exceed that point, and there's a 2-year grace period after graduation before you pay back your loans. That's that issue. I only have 30 seconds. The second issue is the protests for youth on environment. Keep it up. There is no better time than now. There's no more crucial time than now to keep going with your protests, not just in the big cities, but right here in Gander as well.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White.
Yes, as far as the protests go, I'm on side. Keep it up. You guys are the future. Do it. I was tempted to come in and join, but I didn't want to be like Mr. Trudeau and sitting down with Greta just for a photo op. I don't think we should have partisan politics into this. It's for all of us. As far as student education, yeah, well, the Green Party is committed to write off tuition for students and for existing student loans to write those off. And people will say, okay, where's the money coming from for this? Well, listen, have you been listening to Prime Minister Trudeau over the last few years?
Thank you, Mr. White.
The money he's been throwing away, there's money there for it.
Thank you. Mr. Brockie.
Okay, I'm sorry, Hannah, but Mary, can you just repeat the question? Is it about affordability of education, or is it climate change?
It's just in general of what you and your party will do to ensure there's a future for students and all minorities in Canada.
With regards to education, or with regards to...
However you want to interpret it. I have it broad for that reason.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll address the education aspect of it. As far as the Conservative Party of Canada is concerned, they have proposed to increase the contribution levels with registered education savings plans. So if it's a question of education, the party is willing to help save for your choice of education. And then secondly, with regards to the environment, I don't have much time left, but all I would say is check out realplan.ca. It's our plan for reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you, Mr. Brockie. Our next audience question comes from Jane Hamlin.
Hello. So my question is for Noel Joe as well, luck of the draw. There has been a lot of talk lately regarding aquaculture, especially salmon farming. So in the Coast of Bays-Central-Notre Dame riding, what is your stance on open pen salmon farming?
Thank you. It's a good question. Open pen, if we transition, if we look at the aquaculture industry, it's a viable, it's a strong industry, and if we phase into an open pen, we need to slow down. And that's what, we're saying we need to do, the environmental assessments. We need to use the precautionary principles here and look at more how it can be done down in the coast, and ensuring that the jobs down in the Coast of Bays are protected as well, and that the industry stays viable and prosperous.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Sims.
Clothespin or on-land aquaculture, of course, would be ideal in an ideal world, but unfortunately for us, we're in a situation where we cannot get to that level with the investment, but we are practicing good, safe practices for when it comes to aquaculture, especially on the South Coast. Harbour Breton, for the plants that exist in Harbour Breton as well as Hermitage. What we're seeing right now was a disaster that happened because of ocean temperature, not because of chemicals. We can improve upon this, and we can keep moving. It's a vital, vital industry for the South Coast, Coast of Bays in particular, and for the Northeast when it comes to blue mussels.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White.
I just came from Coast of Bays last week, talked to the people down there, talked to the mayor of Bill-Orem, Stuart May. It's a vital industry down there. Right now, 50% of all fish protein in this world comes from aquaculture, believe it or not. But if we're going to do it, we have to do it right. We can't have it infecting some fish escaping and breeding with the wild population, and we can't have other forms of environmental harsh impact. So we have to support our aquaculture industry, but at the same time we have to work really hard at finding a way to make this more environmentally friendly.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Brockie.
Thank you, Hannah. Okay, so as far as aquaculture is concerned, the Liberal government has just announced that in British Columbia they want to phase out aquaculture or open pen aquaculture and phase it out by 2025 and to put aquaculture on land. So the Conservative Party of Canada thinks that's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. I know that the South Coast, the Coast of Bays region has suffered a setback recently, but there has been lots of investments made in that
Thank
industry, and there's lots of jobs, and we'll definitely support people there.
Thank you. Our next audience question comes from John Whalen.
Luck of the draw. I guess my question is also for Noel Joe. Justin Trudeau is, or at least was, fond of saying that the relationship with our Indigenous peoples is the most important. I'd like to know how you think that the Justin Trudeau and the government he leads has lived up to that rhetoric.
Well, thank you, John, for that question. We need, we look at, the nation-to-nation relationship. We need to look at, the relationship that the Liberal government is going in. We need to look at it more strongly. We need to do more. There's still more work to be done on reconciliation and with Indigenous peoples across Canada. And I think that it needs a new direction. And first we will all remember again his comments he made in Grassy Narrows, but thank you for your donation. We need to have more respect, more inclusion for Aboriginal and Indigenous peoples.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Sims.
Yeah, that was an unfortunate comment. I agree with you. Nevertheless, as we look at nation-to-nation building exercise, there is a lot more to do for us. Let me just talk about locally, John. Locally, we have invested with Conn River, Malbegig First Nation, in a substantial way because they actually inspire us to do a lot down there. Just with Coast Guard, with the schooling, and now with the original Mi'kmaq language, it's wonderful stuff. And I'll give you an idea how far we need to go for reconciliation. We do it in small increments. One increment is for the first time since Confederation, we now have a First Nations candidate, and he's standing
Mr. Sims.
right here. That's Noel Joe.
Thank you. Mr. White.
Excuse me. Yeah, I was thinking about this question earlier when we were talking about immigration. Really, we're all immigrants to this country except for the Indigenous people. And I was thinking Noel might throw that out there, but he didn't go for it. So yeah, we need to engage. We need to engage as equals, but there's nothing so unequal as the equal treatment of unequals, you know. We need to reach out. We need to consult. We need to give power to the local indigenous groups. For the last 20 years, I've been up in Nunavut with the Dene people up there, Dene Nations. I've been with the Inuit in Nunavut, and it opened my eyes to the importance of self-governance and all the issues that can be solved by that.
Thank you. Mr. Brockie.
So the question is, the Trudeau government and relations to First Nations. I think some of the things that the current government has done are good, but then you got to look, just one thing, and that's Jody Wilson-Raybould, right? So that's a huge step back, and I think Justin Trudeau over-promises and under-delivers, So.
Thank you, Mr. Brockie. Our next audience question comes from Chad Budgell.
Hello. Can you hear me? My question is for Mr. Brockie. What are your thoughts on Bill C-27 and targeted pension benefits?
And target pension?
The move to targeted pension benefits.
Target. I'm not too familiar with Bill C-27 there. Are you able to inform me on it, or just briefly?
They're moving from a defined benefit pension to a targeted benefit pension.
With regards to, in general, for federal employees, or is it?
Federal pensions.
For federal pensions. From a defined benefit to a targeted pension plan. Well, that's a tough question there. Like as far as, my background in financial services, now the reason I'm assuming the government, and is that proposed?
It's in standing order, I think.
Right. No, I'll pass on that.
We can move over to the other candidates. Mr. Joe?
This is a good question. It's first I heard of that one. But what I will do is I will find an answer for you. I will do the research, and I will get right back to you. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Sims?
Bill C-27 was introduced about 3 years ago. The whole idea of a targeted pension was that you could identify what that pension is going to be as opposed to the defined benefit. Here's the problem with it. Now, it was introduced by my own government, and I didn't agree with it. Shocker. But here's why I didn't agree with it. C-27 was the fact that it does a couple things. It also, it undermines some of your savings in the sense that what it will be out there. It puts too much liability on the employee, in my opinion. The second thing it does, it may, to a certain degree, undermine collective bargaining, which caused me some difficulty. That's why I didn't like C-27. It died on the order paper. It's dead. I hope it stays mostly dead.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White?
Excuse me. Not being involved in the political process before, I'm open and honest, and I must confess that this question has confused me as much as it did the people that were actually in politics following these things along. But yeah, anything that does anything to take away from any of the pensions or pension benefits that accrue to pensioners, then I would be strongly opposed to and fight on behalf of my constituents. So that's about as far as I can go on this, because I'm not totally familiar with the bill.
Thank you, Mr. White. Our next audience question comes from Dan Mahoney.
I'm president of the Gander branch of the Canadian Hard of Hearing, and my question is relating to that. Undiagnosed and untreated hearing loss has serious consequences for newborns, children, adults, and seniors, creating barriers to accessibility. What is your party doing to ensure there is adequate hearing screening programs and appropriate hearing aid options for people living with hearing loss in Canada? And I've directed to Scott.
Thank you. And I'll tell you why I'm glad to get that question, because I know a lot of this is done through the province as far as health, MCP, so on and so forth. However, how does the federal government part research, ingenuity, how this is going to work? The Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency has put in a substantial investment now in Grand Falls, Windsor, at the site there to work on it in conjunction with the town of Grand Falls, Windsor Economic Development. And what we're doing is now we have some of the best people in hard of hearing society in the community itself. And they're working at a Grand Falls, Windsor out of around the world. They visit quite often. So it's an investment that I'm proud of, obviously for economic development reasons, but also because they're doing leading edge work, especially around here, because the incidence of it, as you know, are so high. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White.
Yes, it won't be a few more years, I guess I will be in the category, not to the degree that you are or that you were talked about, but I would hope that if the Green Party has enough representatives that we can force the governments or the people in power to incorporate pharmacare, then there would be more funding available to seniors who are living at the poverty level that just simply cannot afford to buy these devices unless they have insurance policies that they can rely on. And there's a lot of people out there. I've talked to people in my campaigning that are pinched for money.
White.
They cannot obtain those.
Mr. Brockie.
Yeah, Dan, I'm sorry that you have to live with that disability, but I'm sure you're making ways to cope. As far as the Conservative Party of Canada, the nuts and bolts of all the research and so on, I'm not familiar with, but I can tell you that we have made an announcement that it will make it easier for folks to apply for a disability tax credit. So if you do have to buy hearing aids and so on and so forth and pay for medical expenses, then there's a tax credit that can be applied to help you.
Thank you, Mr. Rachi. Mr. Joe.
Thank you. Our new deal for people with health care and that, and we'll start by introducing pharmacare, and by the end of 2020, and it would save more than $500 a year, for those, those benefits as well. So that's what, I think that would be good for the seniors as well, living with these disabilities of hearing loss and that. So I think by introducing pharmacare, I think it would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Our last audience question comes from Ben Wheaton.
Good evening. In Newfoundland, there's a massive out-immigration of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians either moving to the mainland to escape the rising of taxes or in search of new jobs, but it seems lately it's been both. What are you guys going to do, or your government going to do, in order to keep Newfoundlanders here on the island and to grow our economy so that the youth have a future here on this island?
Ben, did you want to direct it to somebody specifically?
Oh, sorry, I guess I'll go with Scott.
I'm so glad you directed to me. That's the very reason why I got in this business way back in the early 2000s, when I had to watch members of my family move away, not because they wanted to or to seek another opportunity, but because they had no choice. And they moved into jobs that paid less. So how do we do that? Education is a key part of it. A lot of people have not moved away and now are moving back because they have the skills and they travel back and forth. It's not the ideal situation to be living, to work somewhere else for a few weeks and then come home for a few weeks back and forth, the turnaround people, we call them. Well, in this particular situation though, what they do bring to the table are highly skilled work with high-paying jobs. Now we have to attract the investment. I'll give you a golden example. Superior Glove in Point Leamington is a lovely little town, and it produces well over 150, 160 employees. They make gloves, and they compete directly with the Chinese. They're the example as to how we can do it better than the world players. So thanks for the question.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White.
Yes, I've often said that we just breed them and ship them out. It's a sad reality here, especially in rural Newfoundland. I once taught in a school in Comfort Cove, Newstead, where we had 200 kids in a little school, K to 6. Now we have, say, 8 or 9 communities, K to 9, where the kids are less than 200 going to that school. What can we do? I'm in the local fire brigade. There's a local, I've been talking with tech jobs and that kind of thing a lot tonight. There's a young guy there, 25 years old. When he was in grade 9, he built his own trap skiff. Very intelligent, very hard working. He wants to get licenses to go into the fishery. He's acquired some, but there's regulations in place. What's happening?
Thank you, Mr. White. Sorry.
Okay.
Mr. Brockie.
Yes, so, as far as keeping people here, it's quite simple. First of all, we've got to make life more affordable for them. Okay, so the Conservative Party has several policies that they've proposed of making life more affordable for folks to stay here. And then secondly, well, we got to create some higher paying jobs. It's pretty simple. And we got to leverage on what we do well. And, we got to get things going.
Thank you, Mr. Brockie. Mr. Joe.
Thank you. I think, we need to start investing into good paying jobs here in our province, and keeping our workers at home and keeping them close to families. It's, it is we need to look at, one of the things that the NDP is looking at doing is raising minimum wage to $15 an hour. If in government, and I think by doing that we can start creating more better jobs and keeping our people at home. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. We're now going to go back to the panelist questions. This time.
Yeah, we are good to go.
We are. There's just two different.
Yeah. My next question will go to Mr. Brockie of the Conservative Party. Mr. Brockie, Canada has concluded many trade agreements that provide mutual access to markets, but internally we still face many trade and regulatory barriers to trade between provinces. Will your party commit to an expedited process of finalizing open market access between provinces by finalizing the Canada Free Trade Act?
Well, the Conservative Party of Canada, under the previous government, opened negotiations with about 50 countries and signed free trade agreements with 50 countries. And provincially, there are barriers. That is correct, but a lot of times it's harder to do things internationally than, get the provinces and the territories to sit down and negotiate something, But what is our government going to do? Right now, we have a proposal for a national energy corridor, which is a tremendous proposal to have a corridor from coast to coast that'll be good for natural gas, oil, hydroelectricity, and any other linear commodity that can be transported from coast to coast. So that might be a springboard, to start negotiations in reducing barriers from province to province. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brockie. Mr. Joe.
Thank you. We know that trade is essential for our economy, economic success. And, we support fair trade. We will always defend Canadian workers in trade negotiations and protect supply management, and stand up against unfair tariffs. We support that fair trade that broadens opportunities and protects our industries and upholds labor standards, and protects human rights as well.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Sims.
The harmonization of regulations is a big key. The trucking sector, transportation sector, we're also talking about building code regulations. These are some of the small things that we have to work on. 20% of our GDP is interprovincial trade. That may not sound like a lot, but it does, at the very base of it, keep us going and moving. Now, for Newfoundland and Labrador, it's a little different situation because we're an island, certainly for Newfoundland, and it's a little more difficult to get to Labrador. So we're going to up our game. Obviously, that's what I want to push for when it comes to that, because I truly believe that once a lot of these regulations are worn down, like Red Seal regulations, Blue Seal regulations when it comes to skilled trades, we can go a long way towards making far better trade compromises or deals with the rest of the country, even though we're on the extreme eastern end.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White.
Yes, we live on the extreme eastern edge of Canada, and we're a victim if we can't have a corridor going right through. So it's inter-provincial trade we're talking about within Canada internally. We were burned during the Churchill Falls negotiations, but the Green Party right now is proposing a green energy corridor from east to west right across Canada. What a boon this could be for Newfoundland if we could do this. The energy that's coming from Muskrat Falls, that will come eventually from Churchill Falls, if this could be put through. What a boon this would be. And Quebec, I think this time we have to find a way to get them on side. The federal government should have the authority to say that it goes through there. But I think to be on side this time because they have green energy that they want to go into that corridor. So I think this can be done. Another thing with free trade, if we could only have that ferry coming to Nova Scotia, between Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, if we were treated the way they are treated in PEI with their ferry and their system, they only pay coming off that island province. Here, we pay going on and coming off. That needs to be changed.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Question for Mr. Joe. Last night during the federal leaders debate, it came out that the bigger provinces in Canada, like the province of Quebec, are receiving an amazing amount of money in equalization payments, while provinces like our own are, as far as we're concerned, not getting our fair share. Does your party commit to looking at that formula and helping provinces like ours get what we feel is rightfully ours?
Thank you for that question. Our party will work with the provinces, and I'll, if elected, I will fight for make sure that we get our fair share of equalization payments as well. And I think we need to look at, our party is committed to working with each province in that, and I think we can continue doing that if elected.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Sims.
Yeah, equalization formula from the 1950s is not based on the relative solvency of any particular province weighing off revenues and costs. The current equalization formula measures one thing, one dynamic, and that's revenues. And there's several key indicators for revenues, including income tax, but the problem for Newfoundland is we're high revenues in oil and gas. That puts us in a tricky situation. What we spend on programs doesn't go into the equation whatsoever. Now, personally, I would like to see some changes because I think some changes are coming, and whether we like it or not, there have been false promises in the past. That's what started the whole big mess between Danny Williams and Stephen Harper, was simply that. But I think we can have a conversation by which every province can come to terms on what it is to qualify every Canadian to have the same level of services which is promised in the equalization formula. It's unfortunate for us we're in that situation, so hopefully it will change.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White.
Yeah, I hope Scott is right there. I'm all behind him. He says he hopes this change is coming. I'm a bit doubtful. It wasn't even on the radar during this election. I would think it would have been put out there, so I hope he's right. I'm sure he's sincere in what he says. But right now, the formula has to be changed. As I said earlier, right now we're getting 17.2% of our provincial budget in transfer payments. There's only one province in all of Canada that gets less than that, and that's British Columbia. Even the provinces that we consider to be big booming provinces get more than we do. And I would go back again to what's happening in Atlantic Canada. New Brunswick gets 36.7% of their budget in transfer payments. Nova Scotia, 30.5% of theirs in transfer payments. PEI, 39% of their budget comes in transfer payments. What do we get? Half, 17.2, or less than half in some regions. Yes, that transfer payment formula needs to be looked at again.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Brockie.
Randy, the answer to your question is yes. As far as a commitment to look at equalization payments, I think that issue is going to be forced upon us. If I'm not mistaken, Jason Kenney in Alberta has proposed to call a referendum by the year 2021 on the subject of equalization. So the perception is that, you know, most of the Alberta money is leaving Alberta to compensate the other provinces, and I think Albertans are feeling alienated, and therefore they're going to push the issue. So it will be dealt with.
Thank you, Mr. Brockie.
My question is for Mr. Sims. The federal government continues to impose significant fares on every person and product coming to and leaving our province. A round trip right now, for example, from Port aux Basques to North Sydney for a family of 4 with a trailer and a pet costs about $2,400. So what will your party do to live up to the terms of union agreement to address Marine Atlantic fares and fight for the people of the province?
Yeah, we're stable now at a 65% cost recovery rate on Marine Atlantic. For me, the cost of goods, there's not a lot within individual products that can be attributed to the direct cost of when it comes across on Marine Atlantic, but it's enough to feel it'd be a pinch. We realize that, you know, which is why you grow our own food, and food security issues matter the most right now because of that. I certainly would like to see that come down, and that's what we've been fighting for, to see that some of the cost recovery ratio be moved. That's my personal commitment. However, I've heard Mr. White talk about it quite a bit, about these rates. But I'd like to remind him that according to the carbon pricing scheme the Green Party has, the price of Marine Atlantic fuel will go way up.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. White.
The ferry is being used anyway, so the price of carbon emissions will not go up. It will remain stable. But there are also alternative sources of energies. There's ferries all over Europe running on electric power. So that's not even an issue there, Scott. It's a red herring to deflect me from what I'm going to say. The last election, the Prime Minister of Canada said that the raise in ferry rates brought in by Mr. Harper, and Mr. Scheer was part of that government, was too high. Something should be done about it. We elected some good people, I'm sure, but 7 Liberal MPs. Did you hear anyone standing up, roaring and defending and speaking out for us to at least get us equal to what's happening in Prince Edward Island? I don't think so. We have to fight for our constituents and not be silenced by our party, and as a Green Party member, I will certainly attempt to do that.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Brockie.
Well, as far as the Marine Atlantic issue, that issue can be looked at. As far as what can be done directly, I can't promise anything. But I guess a round trip on Marine Atlantic would be, close to a round trip via airfare. If I'm not mistaken, the quote was $2,400 round trip. Okay, so a family of 4, you're looking about $3,000 probably to get to Toronto or something, or Montreal. If it's an issue for the constituents of Central Newfoundland, then I would certainly see what can be done. Yeah.
Mr. Joe.
Thank you. Looking at the ferry Marine Atlantic, from my own personal experiences traveling, back and forth, sometimes, to visit family, and that it is costly. The NDP will invest massively in transit, and we're looking at reducing those costs down, and we would work with the province and Marine Atlantic to do such thing.
Thank you, Mr. Joe.
And my final question goes to Mr. White of the Green Party. Mr. White, what do you see as the most critical challenge facing this district, and subsequently, what will you and your party do to handle this issue?
Well, the most important issue facing this district, the whole country, and the whole world is to get our carbon emissions down so with that we can live on this beautiful little planet, this miracle planet that we've been given. How to do that, the big problem is, and keep jobs. People will say, you can't do that, you will lose all the jobs. Well, no, we can do that. We can transition to the green economy, and I've said a number of ways that we can do that right now. In addition to using our hydroelectric power to stimulate industrial growth in the area, we can also get extra value from our fishery. Right now, under the present Liberal government and the former Tory government, we still, this northeast coast has been devastated from the fishery, we still have freezer factor trawlers out there going up through the shrimp stocks while the shrimp plant in Twillingate is closed, while the one up on the Northern Peninsula in St. Anthony is only open part of the year. We need to get serious here in Newfoundland and stick up for Newfoundland and say the adjacency thing is here. We need to keep fish plants like in my own town of Comfort Cove and other places fully operated. We need to keep the jobs in these communities that we do have and then build on that with the green technology that we have by utilizing the hydroelectric power and go from there. And we can also stimulate jobs. I keep going back to this ferry thing because I'm so irked by it. It drives up the price of everything that's on the go here in Newfoundland. So we can do a lot of things, but we have to fight for, I'm a great Canadian, but I'm also a darn good Newfoundlander, and we have to fight for our own people.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Brockie.
Yeah, so Brian, I don't have to tell you, I mean, folks out there, I mean, we're just walking around Gander, you notice that there's a lot of houses up for sale. There's a lot of small businesses that have closed shop, okay? So those aren't good signs. And, for the last 4 or 5 months, I've been knocking on a lot of doors throughout all of the district, or a good chunk of the district. I still got to make it down to Harbor Breton there, but I'll get there this weekend. Anyways, but as far as the number one topic right now is affordability. People are feeling the pinch. I don't have to tell people that. And so, we have concrete ways of mitigating that. Number one is getting rid of the carbon tax, which makes everything more expensive, plus a whole host of other, tax cuts that will be beneficial to everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Brockie. Mr. Joe.
Thank you. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, simply, what do you see as the most critical challenge facing this district, and what will you and your party do to tackle this issue?
I think, traveling around the district, the number one priority is affordability, and that, I hear from so many people who is struggling to get by, who is, can't afford to pay for, basic services such as, their health care, their rent, and that kind of stuff. And that is a big thing that I'm hearing. And one of our big things we're pushing for is the pharma care and the dental care, and the affordable living. And I think if we can get there.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Sims.
Thank you. I think seniors is going to be a critical challenge in the near future. We have an aging population here in this riding, and we have to respond to that challenge. I mentioned earlier about survivors' benefits have to increase, old age security, guaranteed income supplement has to as well, and the financial security of our seniors. We have well-established senior homes now that are doing well. We have to work with the province to make sure they're receiving more, but the key issue is the National Pharmacare Plan, which, unlike the NDP, we're realistic in the sense that we have to work with the provinces to make this done. We can't load these costs down on the provinces without doing the right agreement on pharmacare to bring those drugs down, and not just for seniors, but also for those with rare diseases. It's one of the biggest expenses. It's going higher. 20% premium on most Canadians compared to other country, where we are getting serious with National Pharmacare, and it's about damn time.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. We will now be moving to closing remarks. We're going to start in reverse order. So, Mr. White, you get to go first.
Okay, this is my 2-minute section to talk to you. Basically, there comes a time, in all of our life when we have to make choices. And I've voted all my life for the two main parties, the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party. I haven't gone with the NDP. I was brought up to be hard-working, and I always thought they were a bit too free with my money, so I haven't gone that way. But this time, I could not go. I had to make a choice. I could not stick with the main parties. And it's because of the future of this beautiful home, this beautiful planet that we've been given. It's because of my grandchildren, because of the children, and because of future generations. We have to get this carbon problem solved, and we have to start doing it now. Unlike Mr. Brockie, excuse me for mispronouncing Alex, attacking the carbon tax. I'm not in favor of a carbon tax. Sometimes we have to go to a doctor and we get a medicine that we don't like to take. So maybe, yes, if we're going to have a carbon tax to turn us off from using so much carbon-producing cars or automobiles or whatever, yes, it might be necessary. But if we're going to do that, not do it the way we're doing it now, take it off electricity so the people at the poverty level are paying less, are paying more money than they can afford. And we can't be like the Liberal Party with their proposal. They put a carbon tax on for us to pay, take money out of our pockets. What do? They turn around then and put $13 billion into big oil. So we live on the same little planet, don't we? We're paying carbon tax. Then you turn around and put $13 billion into big oil. Where's all these emissions going? What are they trying to do? I think I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to get reelected. They're not standing up for their principles, and they're not standing up for future generations.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Sims.
I'm trying to get reelected. But here's why I want to be reelected. I've been in this job now 15 years. This is my 6th election. I made a commitment in 2004, and I was very serious about it. It was a very solemn commitment. Because at the time I was living in Toronto, and I came home to run, and I did. And someone said, "Don't you dare ever forget us." In 15 years, I've never forgotten you once. The best thing that I can say to you right now in my own defense is I always looked at this as being the best job I could ever have, a member of parliament. Not higher ambitions, but being a member of parliament. I wanted to do it since I was a kid. And I realized something different in doing this job. It's not a job, it's a life. It's a life I chose to live, but I do it because of each and every single project that is approved, every single file that my staff works on, each and every issue that is in every little town, and there are over 150 towns. We have 40,000 doors to knock on. And I can tell you, this job is not just a job, it is a life. But it's a life I love to do, and I want to do it again. My name is Scott Sims. I'm from Bishops Falls, Newfoundland, and I'll always work for you and stand up for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. Joe.
Thank you again for joining us here this evening. Thanks to Rogers for the coverage. Thanks to my fellow candidates, for listening. I may look young, but I've done a lot in my 31 years. I was a band counselor in Conn River for 4 years. I am committed and dedicated to working hard for the people of Coast of Bays-Central-Notre Dame. As some of you may know, that in 2010 I walked from Conn River to St. John's to raise awareness and money for homelessness and youth at risk. And I can assure you that if I walked that far, I would work hard in Ottawa for you. Seeing firsthand the impacts of of the housing crisis in Newfoundland and Labrador, I know it's time for a change, and we need affordable housing. People are worried about their health. We know that Central Newfoundland has the fastest aging population in the province. Life is getting more and more expensive for everyone, and we are not, the wages is not keeping up. So I'm in this for you. New Democrats are in this for you, and I'm ready to stand up to make life more affordable for the public and to improve public services and take a bold action on our climate change as well. What we need now is the courage to act together, and that is exactly what my party is going to do. And if we want different results, we need to make different choices, and I'm asking for your support. And now the choice is yours, so thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Brockie.
So I just want to qualify that comment that Byron made as far as the carbon tax and it being like a medicine. So the stats show that the medicine doesn't work. So the carbon tax, if you look in the last 3 years, Canada's greenhouse gas emissions have gone up. They haven't gone down. So as far as the Conservative Party of Canada is concerned, I mean, we're not, we believe that climate change is happening and it's a real thing. We just have a different way of addressing it. That it's, it's through technology and innovation that's going to solve the problem, and so on. So back on the closing remarks, like Scott has mentioned, there's 40,000 households to knock on, and I've knocked on a lot of homes, and one in particular on Fogo Island just a couple days ago on Sunday in Island Harbor, and some lady came out, came to the door, and so that you had the smell of cooked dinner. And I gave the lady the spiel, ma'am, I'm from the Conservative Party of Canada, and, I hope you consider us. And she looked at me really puzzled, and she, and I go, what's wrong, ma'am? She says, I can't vote Liberal anymore. It's Justin Trudeau. And I go, I know, ma'am, it's a tradition here that, people vote Liberal just like cooked dinner on Sunday, right? And so I just want to say that, if elected, you'll be well represented. People that know me from the restaurant that I did own, that I gave it a lot of energy and a lot of drive, and I intend to bring that to Ottawa if you let me to. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Brockie. Hopefully you found tonight to be interesting and informative. At this time, there's a few people we need to thank. First, obviously, the candidates for their participation and for their hard work in the campaigns. We wish you all the best in the coming weeks. Next, our panelists. Thank you so much for the questions and your time tonight. So we had So Martin Jones, Randy Connors, Brian Mosher, thank you so much. Our timekeeper, Sheldon, thank you so much for keeping us all on track and maybe out of here a little early, which is nice. The Quality Hotel and Suites for the table dressings, Brian Dove, and the staff at the Arts and Culture Center, the board of directors and staff of the Chamber for their assistance in making this happen. And last but not least, Roger Robinson and all the crew here tonight at Rogers TV for a great job and for partnering with us again. I'd like to encourage everyone to get out and vote, whether it be at the polling station on October 21st, whether you drop by McCurdy Complex to complete your special ballot, or take advantage of the advanced polls that run from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. at the Fraser Road United Church Hall from October 11th to the 14th. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.